History is about to be made in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Voters will go to the polls this November to elect the state's first female governor. But what do you know about Winsome Earle-Sears and Abigail Spanberger? Your local election headquarters prepares you for that decision, where each candidate stands on the issues and a look inside how they got to where they are today. This is Chasing History, the race for governor.
Hi everyone, I'm Deanna Albritton from WRIC in Richmond.
And I'm Tom Shad from Wavy TV 10 in Hampton Roads. Welcome to Chasing History.
Over the next hour, we'll be talking with the candidates running for governor here in Virginia, not just on policy, but on a personal level, a very personal level.
And we begin with the current Lieutenant Governor, Winsome Earle-Sears. She is the Republican nominee for governor, and we recently caught up with her at the VFW post in McLean in Northern Virginia. I'm here at the VFW post in McLean, Virginia with Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earle-Sears, the Republican nominee for governor. Thank you for joining us, Lieutenant Governor Sears.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
This is wonderful.
Why did you choose this particular venue for your interview with us?
Well, you know, I am a Marine, and you know what they say, once a Marine, always a Marine,
Mm-hmm.
and these are my people, and you know, we know each other. Those of us who've served in the military, we have this certain camaraderie where everybody knows what it feels like to, you know, you just walk into a room and you've never met them before, but we instantly understand what everybody is suffering, because that's generally what it is. And, or, you know, the good things that we can talk about. It's just family. And so that's why when I left the Marine Corps, I felt like I left family behind. It was very traumatic for me.
Well, speaking of family, I want you to go back to when your father came to this country from Jamaica. You tell the story that he had only $1.75 in his pocket when he came to America. He was an immigrant.
Yes.
How did his experience shape your values?
Well, the fact that he came just 17 days before Dr. King gave his I Have a Dream speech meant that times were really bad for us. And so I asked my father, why did you come to America? Because he could have gone to England, because there was, you know, Jamaica was still a colony. You know, there was not a Jamaican person. We were all British in the same way that, you know, Americans were at one time not Americans, British. Right. And he said, because this is where the jobs and the opportunities were. Even though it was a bad time for us, he still came. And then remember, 63 was really a massive year for the civil rights movement, because we had a governor in the South who said, you know, the people who look like me aren't getting into his university. You remember that? I mean, you remember that down in Alabama, the 3 little black girls died as a result of the bombing. You know, it was just a bad time. And yet he decided America was where he was going to restart his life at 25 years old. 7 quarters. What are you going to do with that? And that tells me that you can start with nothing, and if you work hard, and in America, if you work hard, you can make it, because every single thing I've ever had, I had to fight for. Nobody gave me anything. You know, whatever it was, I had to assert myself, whatever. I had to make a goal and try to get to it. I mean, that's just how I understand it. And my father modeled it for me.
Why did you join the Marines?
Because when my grandmother died, his mother, and let me just say this to grandparents, that they don't understand, I think, that we're listening. And I remember my grandfather talking to the older grandkids. I was at the tail end, and he was talking about, get a college degree, yes, but get a trade, because if you have a trade, you will always have work, and they can't take that from you. And so I was hearing that, and so, but then my grandmother died, as I was about to tell you, and I just felt like my life was over. I was 18, and what am I supposed to do? She's in a casket, and what is the point of living? And then I saw Jet magazine on my mother's coffee table in Jamaica, and I opened it up, and there it was, the few, the proud, the Marines. And I thought, well, if anybody can give me the discipline and reasons to live, they will be able to do that. So the Marines literally saved my life when I was 18.
What was it like growing up in the Bronx?
Yeah. So the the South Bronx even, the 70s for me. My dad arrived in the 60s, but then I came in 71 when I was 6 years old from that Pan American plane. Remember Pan Am with the bowler hats and all that?
Do.
And it's a different country. You know, I'm 6 years old. It was a culture shock. The weather, you know, can I just talk about the weather? You know, in Jamaica, nobody asks what the weather is today. It's always hot and it's always sunny. And then I'm running around, you know, with the grass under my foot, you know, barefooted in the yard because it's just nice. And then I come and here I am behind 6 different locks. I kid you not. Lock 1, lock 2, lock 3, and then there's the one on the floor that attaches to the door. And I don't understand this. And they're speaking English, but it's not our English, you know, and I have to get used to that. And it's the smells are different.
In New York versus Jamaica?
Yes, their place, and even now, I'll get into a car, for example, and I'll smell that certain smell, and it takes me right back to when my dad picked me up and when I was 6 years old.
We're talking about family now, so let's go to child care.
Yeah.
One of the greatest challenges for young families these days is finding affordable child care. I work with many people who have the same problem. And how did you and your family navigate this issue when you were raising your 3 daughters?
Yes. So, you know, when I started college, I had 3 children under 5. And I was a single mother at one time. And so I know that of which I speak when I say I felt like, and my husband and I talked about it, all of our money was going to childcare, every dime that I earned. And we just had to bite the bullet on that because we were thinking, we're investing in my future. We're investing in my future, and you know, well, we got to figure it out somehow. But there came a point, and this is when I was in California, and then we moved here to Virginia when our last baby was a year old, and we just couldn't make it work. And so I became a stay-at-home mom, thankfully, because we had the means. We weren't rich. We had just enough to get by, but I still needed to go to school because I wanted to become an attorney, and somebody still had to, you know, help take care of the children. And so what my husband and I did was he took a lower paying job so that he could be home to be able to be with the kids so that I could go to school. And we only had the one car, you know, we just did what we had to do to make it work.
Families make choices.
Yes, we do. But what we've tried to do in our administration, Winsome Sears administration, is to, if we don't have to fight so hard and live like that, maybe we can make somebody else's life that much better with more opportunity. So we've put money into childcare. I think we started with $440 million, and you know, we had to make some compromises, and so I think it ended up being like 300 some million. But all that I've ever tried to do politically is to ask myself, how can we make somebody's life better? And especially based on my own experiences. I'm not coming out of left field. I know what it's like to not have childcare.
You and your opponent have also had some strong words. This is where you both agree on the car tax. If you become governor...
I will become governor because I have the common sense solutions that will keep all of the economic successes that we've had alive. I was there.
So what will you give up then, or what will we give up in Virginia to repeal the car tax?
So we actually have the money, you know. We have the funds. One of the other things that I've promised myself, and I think to our cities and our counties, local government I should say, is I am not going to give you an unfunded mandate. Because what does that do? It makes us at the state level look good because we say we're going to do X, but then we force the local government to figure it out. And so they're the ones who are suffering because of decisions that we made. My objective is always to leave something better than I found it. And the way that we do that, of course, is to help the localities with the money. That's why, and we're getting to the car tax, but that's why when we tried to get rid of the money that people pay on groceries, and you know, the locality said it's not fair to us, we'd have to find the money, and so we said, okay, we'll get rid of the state portion of groceries. What we can do, what's in our authority, we'll do that. So now coming to the car tax, everybody hates it. The people want it gone. This is not hard. They don't like it. I don't like it. I have already paid off my car loan, my husband and I. Why do we have to keep paying the government, who had nothing to do with us paying for this car, buying for this car, making the deal? And so what the governor did was to put money in to get rid of the car tax finally. And unfortunately, and I don't like to get political, but the truth is the truth, the Democrats wouldn't agree to it. Didn't want to get rid of it, I guess, or didn't want to give him a win, whichever way, but don't play politics with people's lives. So we have the money, we can do this.
With the $1 billion that you have in
Well, yes,
state
we
funds.
have. We have a surplus, as you know.
Right.
And this is after we've given, what, over almost $9 billion now back to the Virginians who worked hard for it. This is after we've given 18% increase in teacher pay. Unheard of, by the way. Normally it's a 2%, 3%, 18%. This is after we've fully funded just about our rainy day fund, as well as our, and it just escaped me, our rainy day fund and ready reserve fund. Those are our two savings accounts. And we still maintain our AAA bond rating and so much other things that we've done.
After the break, Winsome Earle-Sears discusses her thoughts on the future of education in Virginia and how she dealt with a very difficult personal tragedy in her life. That's when Chasing History continues.
Let's get to education now. What in your daughter's experiences in education stood out to you? Is there a moment that has really informed some of your thoughts and your values on education from your daughters?
Well, you know, actually, we can start with me. Because when I was, you know, again in the Bronx, when I was in school, in elementary school, I wasn't learning anything. I didn't know that. My father saw that I wasn't learning anything. He sent me back to Jamaica, to a third world country for my education. So we didn't just start down this path of education problems. It has existed. It's just now full blown. And it's what brought me back into politics. Because remember, I've been gone for, my last elected office was 2001, and yet now I'm back, and it's because I saw that our children weren't learning. So I look at what was happening with my children and how they were missing certain portions of their education. And even though what I tried to do was to, during the summers, I would make them have a project, and they would have to explain to me what they discovered based on this project. Read the encyclopedia based on, you know, whatever, and be prepared for me to question them. We limited television. We did all this, and still there were gaps in their education. And we've just got to do better, because it's education that lifted my dad out of poverty when he came with his $1.75. Education lifted me. This is why I'm here, and I want our children to understand that they can be like me, they can even be better, because I can't ever be president. I can't be vice president because I wasn't born here, but they can. And if they think that I did something special to get here, they won't even try.
You mentioned 2001.
So by the way, you know who's not ever running for president?
I do know that now. But of course I knew that since you weren't born in the United States. So, well, why did you get into politics when it looked like the odds were stacked against you in your first run for the General Assembly? Back in 2001, you were a great underdog.
Yes.
And you made the decision, I'm going to get into this and I'm going to go for it.
Well, I felt that I was called. You know, I've always said that I'm a Christian first and a Republican second. And when I know that there is a higher power greater than myself who keeps me in check, you know, tells me that pride you have, etc., those sorts of things. And if you see someone who needs help, don't tell them go down to social services. You help them, you know. You feed them, you clothe them, and it's kind of why
Bear each other's burdens.
That's why I ran a women's homeless shelter, and I also had a men's prison ministry. You know, I'm trying to change a life. And I remember I would have a Bible study that I would go to on Mondays, and then I would leave it and go to the soup kitchen, and because I was always fully dressed in heels, you know, there I was, mopping the floors in heels, but just to let people know that somebody cares. So this was no different. It's just political. But it's service. Isn't that what politics is supposed to be? Serving the people? And nobody had ever asked me how I, felt about anything. Nobody asked my opinion about policy. The Republicans never came, yes, and the Democrats never came. And I guess the Republicans never came because they thought, well, she's not ever going to vote for us. And the Democrats never came because I guess they figured she's black. We already have her. This is not what America needs. America needs to know that you must come and ask the people that you want to serve, what do they think? What do they want? What is the policy? Hence my car tax. But how do you know how to serve me if you never hear from me? If you act as if I don't exist? No. It's the other way around. You represent us. You come and talk to us, which is why when I was elected, my first time, I went with the 2 budget books down to one of my housing, areas, public housing. Mm-hmm. And the mothers came with the babies, and we talked about it. And we didn't have a whiteboard, we had a chalkboard. And so I would show them how to read a budget book. Look at this, now let's trace it in the next book, and you see this? And they said, nobody ever came and talked to us like that. That's what it is. I just wanted to serve.
And that brings us to your Christian faith, because we're talking about servant leadership. How will your Christian faith influence you as governor of all Virginians?
Well, it's always about making sure that we don't do any harm and that we treat everyone fairly. Is this policy harmful? Is this policy more, for a certain group as opposed to other groups? It has to be fair. Now, some people have more needs than others, so it can't be an across-the-board approach at times. For example, we have to say lower income at a certain, income above the poverty level. They need a little bit more help, so we have to help them more than maybe somebody else who doesn't, they have more income. And so I think that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make people better, right? We're trying to ensure that everybody has opportunity. And it's really simple, I think.
I wanted to ask something very, very that's deep and personal in your life, a personal tragedy, when you lost one of your daughters and 2 of your granddaughters in a car accident.
Half of my family.
In 2012. I mean, this actually hurts me to ask the question. But after that happened, what kept you going?
The Lord. Because, but here's the thing. And I know people will think maybe this is crazy, but it's the truth. The month before they left for heaven, and you notice I said left for heaven, I don't say died, because I believe that they're very much alive. They're waiting for us to come to heaven and see all that glory. So the month before they left, Faith, the youngest granddaughter, she's 5, and she would say, Grandma, Jesus is going to give us a big house, a really big house. And I said, yes, Faith, I know. And she just kept talking about it. And then one day when we, normally they would come over and spend maybe one day of the week with us, and I was putting her to bed and I heard her pray, and thank you, Jesus, for the big house you're going to give us. And I thought, something's going on, and my daughter isn't telling me about it. And then Faith was drawing really big houses. You know what? She didn't know the word mansion, and that's why she said really, really big house. So anyway, I asked my daughter, Dijon, I said, are you guys moving? Because Faith keeps talking about Jesus giving you all a big house. And she said, I don't know what she's talking about, Mom. And the very next day, they were going on home. And so I don't know how people handle something like that, because how can you sit at a funeral when you have 3 caskets, not 1, not 2, but 3? That's why I say I'm a Christian first and a Republican second, because I get my strength from the Lord. Now, it doesn't mean that I wasn't collapsing everywhere, because I was. I mean, our bodies can only tolerate so much stress and grief, and there is a hole. And those who have had children go on ahead of them, they know exactly when I talk about there's a hole in your stomach and you can't feel it, but one day it closes and you're not even realizing it. But you know, I was just thinking when I woke up the next day, which it wasn't really, you know, I didn't even sleep, but I was just thinking, what am I going to do now? I wasn't talking to God about it, but he answered and he said, focus on the children you have left. That's right. They still need their parents.
I couldn't say it any better myself.
Yeah.
When you were running your own business, you're an electrician.
Yes.
What did you learn from that experience of running your own business?
Well, you know, I became an electrician because of what my grandfather said about the trades. You know, remember I started telling you that story. So in the Marine Corps, I was a journeyman electrician and a diesel mechanic. So I like to say you could smell me before you saw me. And, you know, I was in charge of these huge machines and it was very interesting. I think I'm still the only lieutenant governor currently who can put on a pair of spikes and climb up those telephone poles. Yeah. I learned because, you know, you have to have gravity and lean back when you're working on them, and I forgot and slid all the way down the pole, and I had creosote burns on my arms. Never did that again. But you asked the question, and it's now that I have my degrees, you know.
Right,
so
you have several degrees.
Yes, I don't know, I just push myself, I suppose. But my business, I'd been out of the electric business for too long, but I started that business, hired the people who know what to do, and it was a great business until government policies shut my business down. It wasn't COVID that did that. It was the person who sat in the big chair who did that, because we know that Ron DeSantis didn't shut Florida down, and he was governor, and Abbott didn't shut Texas down as governor. Kristi Noem didn't shut South Dakota down. So it matters, again, who sits in the big chair. And I'm always going to be about liberty. Liberty is what we need.
Because you ran your own business in, was it 2005 until?
I started it during the Great Recession. Who starts a business then?
Oh,
I
that's
do.
right. That was
Winsome
2008.
does. Well, you know, I'd left where I was and I was praying for, you know, my own thing because I'd led organizations. You know, my last degree, my master's, is in organizational leadership. And it seems that my gift is to go into wherever there's some kind of, not chaos necessarily, but in need of organizing, and I fix it up and move on. I said, Lord, I want my own thing now. And that's what he gave me, you know. And we did very, very well. I had, including myself, 6 employees, 3 trucks. I started with nothing, and we made it a go. We did very well until government policies. See, government policies again. So I know that of which I speak. We've got to get rid of regulation. We got rid of about 80,000 now, and there's still plenty to go. They're job-killing regulations, and we need job creators to continue to come to Virginia. If I could finish with this, and if people say, well, what do we really, you know about her policies? How she? 3 things. If you take nothing away else from this, are the children learning? Will it help the children learn? Number 2, are we going to be safe and secure? Yes. And number 3, will this create jobs? Those 3. I think everything else will fit under that umbrella.
Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earle-Sears, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. Much more still to come on Chasing History.
After the break, we'll go one-on-one with the Democratic nominee for governor, former Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger. Stay with us.
Welcome back to Chasing History. In our last half hour, we heard from Lieutenant Governor and Republican nominee for governor, Winsome Earle-Sears, about her plans should she win the election.
Now you'll meet the Democratic candidate. Former Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger stopped by an organization for veterans in Henrico County. That's where I got to talk to her about her plans and her policies. We are here at Tech for Troops in Henrico County with the Democratic gubernatorial candidate, Abigail Spanberger. Thanks so much for joining us. We want to hear a little more about what makes you tick as a person and as a candidate. So let's jump right in.
Thank you. Well, thank you for spending some time together. I'm delighted to sit down with you.
Yes, so let's talk about where we are sitting down first. We're sitting in this warehouse. There are a lot of old technology that some of our viewers might recognize in the background. What is this space and why did you choose it for this interview?
So I'm really excited to be here at the space, Tech for Troops. It's an organization that I first became aware of when I was first elected to Congress because it's a nonprofit that does tremendous work within the veteran community, ensuring that veterans have not only computers, but the knowledge base of how to use them. They have expanded in the years since I first met Mark Casper, who's the founder, to include suicide prevention work and really ensuring that whether it is ensuring that veterans have the skill set to potentially go out and get a job, after they've transitioned out of the military, or have access to a computer so they can do at-home banking or look for jobs online or just connect with family and friends. This organization does incredible work here in Virginia, certainly, but far beyond. And I was first connected with Tech for Troops back when I was first elected to Congress because, in order to support their work, I got to work straight away working on a piece of legislation, a bill that we ultimately did get signed into law called the Computer for Veterans and Students Act. And the purpose of this bill is to make sure that government surplus computers don't just go off into warehouses, but can be directed over to nonprofits that do tremendous work in getting those computers both updated and ready for distribution to veterans, to seniors, to students, to those who might really benefit from having access to technology.
Well, I want to start a little further back than when you first got into Congress to learn a little bit more about how you came to some of the policy priorities you have now. And I want to start with some milestones, especially some firsts. So can you tell us what was your first job and maybe how that's impacted how you see labor and workers today?
Well, certainly I began as a babysitter in my earliest days as a babysitter. And then when I guess I was 15, I got a job at a local daycare just down the street from my house. And so I would work there a couple days a week after school as a floater between rooms, singing songs with the toddlers, cuddling some of the babies, and just spending time with kids. And that's where I first started. And then, certainly I spent time as a lifeguard in the hot Virginia summers. And from there, spent time, worked in a restaurant, through college, worked in a medical office doing some of their filing, and then continued into a variety of roles before beginning my career.
And so how do you feel like the variety of roles, what experience did they give you that has informed some of the priorities you have today, do you think?
Well, I think starting certainly as a babysitter, but ultimately in a daycare, the recognition of how important our kids are. I'm also a mother. I have 3 daughters. They're now 11, 14, and 16. And so to be able to think back on what it was like when I was a 15-year-old and, I was in those rooms with the daycare teacher when parents would come in after their workday and they were excited to hear what their kids had learned or done or the art that they had, some of those memories are very strong for me about the way that that even as a young person, I was kind of part of trying to make sure that kids were not only safe, but that they were drawing beautiful pictures or singing fun songs and really kind of exploring so much. And I loved reading to kids. That in the afternoons I would spend time reading to them, particularly as some of the daycare teachers were doing some of the end of the day tidying or filling out those sheets so that parents knew what their kids had worked on. And I think I've always loved kids. I've always loved kind of thinking through how do you make sure that kids have, all of the resources and supports that they need. And so I think while I certainly pursued a career kind of in a very different space as a law enforcement officer and then ultimately as a CIA officer before entering politics. Some of my fondest, earliest working memories are being able to work in a small community setting with kids.
In today's, I could say, challenging environment for childcare and affordability for families, do you think and call back to those experiences when you're working on that issue?
I think I mostly call back to my own experiences as a mother, trying to not just find a daycare with an open spot, but find a daycare that felt like the right fit for my children. Certainly when my first daughter was born, we were living in Northern Virginia, and getting on wait lists as soon as I knew I was pregnant, and going around and visiting places and recognizing that daycare it's so expensive, but it's also your most important, as a parent, the idea that the most important person in your life, your child, is going to be in the care of other people, spending time kind of getting to know the daycare staff and the community that wants to be so essential. And so, looking at issues of affordability, we have challenges across Virginia. Daycare is so expensive. Early childhood education is so expensive. And for families that are already facing, high costs in housing and high costs in healthcare, the high costs in daycare is one more additional challenge. But frankly, in many parts of Virginia, we actually have daycare deserts where there really are just not options for families. And that, frankly, stifles some of the growth in businesses that might be able to grow and make investments or build up a presence in a particular region. But it impacts the family that is making choices to pursue a job a bit further off because there's daycare options nearby. And so, certainly there are, incredible programs in existence in Virginia, and ensuring that I'm continuing to grow them and ensure that we have folks who are on the wait list for daycare support to be able to actually have more parents be able to utilize those resources, but also put a major focus on how do we actually grow the number of quality providers that exist across Virginia for families who want them.
And like you said, this has been a problem since you were trying to find a daycare for your girls, right?
Yeah.
And when you talk about
it's only gotten worse.
Yeah, and it's only gotten more expensive, more challenging. And so when you talk about that choice of whether to pursue jobs that are further off or farther off, right? You are really an example of that with work at the CIA, I would think, with your political career. So how did you and your husband navigate that? And then how did you personally in these male-dominated fields?
I will admit we've always been lucky when we've lived in Virginia. Certainly my oldest daughter was born, we were living in Northern Virginia. My parents and my in-laws are both in the Richmond area, and my daughter was very prone to ear infections, and so my mother or my mother-in-law would kindly from time to time come up for a couple days at a time, because of course if a child has a fever, they get sent home from daycare, and that is something that we were so lucky to have as a resource. But so many people, I am well aware, so many people do not have that same opportunity or that same the benefit of family nearby. And what I've been hearing, certainly from employers, but also from people, is the very real choice that many families are making for one of the parents to exit the workforce. And certainly many families choose to exit the workforce, spend time at home with their children, and that is their choice to make. But to hear someone who would have otherwise stayed in the workforce exit because of childcare, that I think is an example of a place where we here in Virginia can do better, and recognizing that the way that we help businesses succeed and families succeed is by ensuring that there are the foundational pieces, whether it's roads and bridges and infrastructure, or housing that a workforce can live in, or good schools. The existence of quality, affordable healthcare is important. The existence of quality, affordable childcare is also central to a workforce.
When we come back, Abigail Spanberger with her take on eliminating the car tax and how her family shaped her view on education. That's next on Chasing History.
You've talked about all the costs that families are facing. There's one cost I want to ask you about that's another first. When did you get your first car tax bill? And what did you think when you received it?
So I'm on maybe on the flip side of other people. I've always known the car tax as a Virginian. It was, frankly, when we lived out of state that I realized other places don't have a car tax, that I realized that the sort of most hated tax in all of Virginia is actually not something that's just kind of an accepted practice elsewhere. So I long been aware of the car tax, got my first one, I suppose, when I had the first vehicle that I would have owned, which is when I started, went off to college. Yeah.
Your eyes are wide.
Well, it's funny because so my husband wrote a paper in high school about the car tax and how terrible it is and this sort of unique element of Virginia tax law. And now that I'm running for governor, we actually, and this is very, very true, we have a rule in my house that we do not talk about the car tax before 9 a.m. Because my husband is a bright-eyed early morning person, and there's been times where, I'm making a cup of coffee at 6 a.m. and he's digging deep on car tax related policy. So 9 a.m. is the kind of pivot point when
you need to have your coffee
I need
before
at least
you
two
talk about
cups
the
of
car
coffee
tax.
before he comes at me about the car tax.
So you and your opponent have had some strong words about the car tax. How do you actually do that as a governor? Would we have to give up something in order to repeal the most hated tax, as you just called it?
Well, so I know that we are a little bit, I think we only have 20-something minutes for this interview, so I will keep my keep my answer to this a little bit time sensitive. There's sort of many hurdles that we would need to actually contend with to do away with this car tax. One, it requires a constitutional amendment. In Virginia, of course, that's a multi-year process. Two, the car tax is actually, as much as we hate it as Virginians, it's a vital way that localities bring in revenue. And in fact, some years back, when we saw a former governor work to get rid of the car tax, in fact, what that administration did was actually just funnel state money to localities to replace a portion of what we as citizens have to pay. And so it didn't go away. It maintains its importance to localities as a way of bringing in revenue, and the revenue that localities have far more flexibility in creating. And so the very real challenge is the car tax, as much as we hate it, it's essential to paying for schools and paying for police and paying for firefighters and EMS and local services. And so in order to be able to eliminate the car tax, we need to, one, have that constitutional amendment, but importantly, ensure that our localities are still able to pay for those essential services, and that we are able to ensure that the revenue lost from the car tax is something that localities would be able to have access to some other way. So I'll work with anyone, Democrats, Republicans, legislators, or otherwise, who have proposals, and certainly I'm digging into all of the different ways that we could potentially ensure that we're not hurting our ability to pay for first responders and to fund our public schools and fund our police departments. But I would absolutely love it if we are able to get to a place where we can ensure that the most hated tax in Virginia is one that we actually get rid of permanently into the future.
So you're committed to pursuing that, to digging into the proposals as governor, just preferably not before 9 a.m.
Well, if I'm at the office, I'm often at the office before 9 a.m. Okay. So if I'm at the office, one can assume that I'm usually on my second cup of coffee, and it's fine. But at my home, not before 9 a.m.
Okay, that seems fair. So you mentioned schools and funding schools, and so I'd like to pivot there. In your experience as a mother, of these 3 girls, elementary, middle, and high school, although a rising freshman, right? So soon to have 2 high schoolers. What in your daughter's experiences in education has stood out to you? Is there a moment that stood out to you that has really informed some of your thoughts on education?
My mother-in-law is also a career English teacher. She's worked in a couple different counties, but the vast majority of her time was spent in Henrico County as an English teacher. So I always have the perspective as well as of hearing her stories about her time in the classroom, and frankly along the way meeting people who knew her as a teacher. So hearing stories of the way that my mother-in-law as an English teacher impacted people's lives, I think is, continues to inspire me about the impact that I know teachers can have. And of course, I have my own teachers who I know changed my life. But as a mother, I would say the important way that teachers have helped me ensure that I know that my kids are getting what they need. Helping as one of my daughters was a little bit behind where she needed to be in reading, reaching out to her teacher who was working tirelessly to get her up to level, but saying, what do you recommend? And she recommended a book series that she knew my daughter would love. And I'm not up on the newest kind of elementary school book series that might trigger that level of excitement that can help my daughter feel confident while she practices. And so the way my children's teachers have been helpful to me as a parent, to my husband as a parent, but importantly, I've also seen some of my kids' most beloved teachers exit the teaching workforce. One of my daughters, her absolute favorite teacher, who was like an inspiration to her. She thought this teacher was, just the coolest, most exciting person. That teacher married to another teacher. They decided that one of them would stay in education and the other spouse would exit. And unfortunately, it was my daughter's beloved teacher, who exited the workforce. And so as I look towards what I will do as governor, I want to ensure that someone who chooses to pursue a next career, that's their choice. But I don't ever want someone who's devoted and an unbelievably good educator to essentially choose to exit a profession that they love and that they are good at because they want to be able to afford to buy a house in the community that is theirs. And because the reality is that times are just getting tougher and tougher, and ensuring that one, whether it's a function of paying our teachers more, or recognizing the challenges that they face, as my experiences as a parent, and having seen some teachers who my kids have loved exit the workforce is something that I've taken note of.
So is teacher pay the avenue that you really primarily would pursue or focus on as governor? Because we went into last school year with hundreds more teacher vacancies than we had the previous years.
So teacher pay is certainly an element of retaining teachers. As many teachers will tell me, they never went into teaching because they thought it would be a lucrative path, but they went into teaching because they love it, and to be able to earn a competitive salary, at least competitive with neighboring regions and neighboring states, is important. But when it comes to the shortage of teachers that we're seeing in classrooms, there's really good evidence, and in fact, specific to Virginia, there's a JLARC study. There's really good evidence of the types of teacher training programs that really ensure that our teachers are set up for success when they enter the classroom. There's an example of a program in Virginia, the RTR program, which is a teacher residency program where you can earn your degree while teaching in a classroom with a mentor teacher. And for the years that program has been in place, we know that teachers who enter those classrooms, they stay longer, they know they're set up for success, they've seen or experienced kind of all of the challenges of a classroom during that mentorship time. And then we know, and I've spoken to many who've participated in the program, that those who serve in that mentor role also are able to further develop their skills and really, kind of fall back in love with teaching, but in doing so know that they're part of building up that next generation of educators. So, teacher residency programs, the types of teacher training that the state pursues, certainly not just salaries, but also ensuring that the support staff in a school is sufficient to ensure that teachers aren't tasked with doing everything, that the support staff is there so that they can do the teaching in the classroom and the support staff is around to be a part of that school community. There are many priorities, and those are just a couple that overall I think would have a positive impact on our ability to both recruit and retain teachers in Virginia.
Okay. We just have a couple of minutes, so I want to get to people who are not choosing to leave their jobs, particularly federal jobs. We have a recent Supreme Court decision that allows the Trump administration to really move forward with a lot of the cuts they're making. What do you do as governor in a state that depends on federal employees so much?
Well, I think for starters, we need a governor who is going to stand up to the administration and make clear that the impact of these firings is severe, certainly for the individuals who've lost their job, but for the greater economy. These are hardworking Virginians. We have more than 320,000 federal employees who live in Virginia, who've devoted themselves to service to country. And when they are losing their jobs, it's an impact on them, on their family, but also on Virginia and on those who might be utilizing the resources or the kind of the benefiting from the job that they do. A perfect example, I was in Blacksburg and I spoke with a gentleman who's a veteran, and he said that he has deeply worried about the cuts that he's seen. He's seen nurses fired from the VA and brought back to the VA, and he worries about what that means for the care that he and his fellow veterans are receiving. He's also deeply concerned about what it means for those who have lost their jobs and, in many cases been brought back when it comes to those healthcare roles. But I've also heard from restaurant owners and small business owners, particularly in Hampton Roads and Northern Virginia, where now they're seeing an impact on their businesses because the clientele that used to take the family out to dinner on Friday, they're not coming. The folks who might be in the market for a new refrigerator, they're not out shopping for an upgrade because they've either lost their job or they fear they might. And so the impacts of what's happening in Washington, whether it's the DOJ and federal firings, whether it's the trade wars that are impacting business owners of all sizes as well as individual Virginians, or whether it's the bill that was just signed into law that we know will put Virginia on a trajectory towards the loss of health care for hundreds of thousands of Virginians and the endangerment of many of our rural hospitals. We need a governor who will make clear the impact on Virginia, take action trying to stand up to those threats, but also, as governor, I will do my best to ensure that those who've lost their jobs can transition into the workforce, and that Virginia is doing all that's possible to create a steady environment, whether it's in light of the federal firings, the trade wars, or the threats and cuts to healthcare.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks again to both candidates for taking the time to sit down and talk with us.
Quick reminder, early voting begins September 19th and Election Day is November the 4th.
And also remember, it's your right to decide who will make history here in Virginia. Thanks for watching.